Hello, viewers, and welcome to the latest episode of The Huddle. Tim Poole here, editor of Gambling Insider, and I'm delighted that you can join us for a conversation with Nigel Eccles, an entrepreneur intrinsically linked with the past of gambling as an original founder of FanDuel and someone very much looking to the future with his new venture in crypto and social operator BetHog. Nigel speaks to us about his history with FanDuel and gives us also a brief overview of the latest legal proceedings between him and the company. He also talks us through BetHog, CEOs on social media, and even how social media impacted the recent US election, as well as a number of other topics. Nigel, thanks for joining us.
Wow, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, looking forward to speaking to you about a wider range of topics, wider range of companies perhaps as well. But to start off with, you guys have recently launched BetHog. Can you tell us all about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we started work on BetHog by January this year. Basically, like, the first thing is BetHog is a crypto casino and sportsbook. I've never counted all of them, but I suspect there's probably over 500 crypto casinos online. And so, an obvious question is, like, what's different? Like, why would you go into this market when there's so many others out there? And I think the reason we thought it was interesting was when you look at most of those casinos, those 500 crypto casinos, they're all pretty much the same. And the reason they're the same is that they all use the same third-party products. So, products from like Pragmatic, Evolution, Hacksaw, B Gaming. There's a list. There's a list of several hundred gaming providers. They work with aggregators and they give the same product to the customer. And because those products are kind of all the same, what they end up doing is competing on and bonusing and rake back. And so they're selling a commodity product and they're pricing as a commodity product. And we kind of looked at it and we sort of thought, well, that's kind of weird. These are entertainment products. Surely there must be space in the market to invest and build new products, right? New games that users might like. And the one area where we thought that there was a real opening was around streaming. So over the last 5-10 years, streaming has become one of the primary acquisition channels for crypto or for casino, all types of casino. But the games themselves haven't really changed. So we will see, Rothstein on Kick, for example, but he's playing a slots game that I might have played like 10 years ago. And so we sort of thought, well, what if we were to design a casino game with streaming in mind? What would it look like? How would it be different? And some of the things that we've started to build into the games that we're building are games that are sort of more visually appealing to that audience, right? That they can actually sort of see and understand what's going on. And then secondly, one that can be more interactive, so the audience actually can participate and be part of the game. They're not just sort of passively watching. So that's one of the titles we've just released, is exactly that. But that's sort of one of the themes that we're trying to bring into it. So the differentiation that we're trying to create with BetHog is that they're unique titles that you can only play on BetHog that work much better with this sort of streaming audience.
Yeah, sure. Makes a lot of sense. Couple of follow-up questions on that specific point. I guess you guys still do offer the classic titles, the Pragmatics and Evolutions, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of this interactive and kind of social element, there's a big crossover there with Crash games, I guess, which obviously were kind of crypto inspired to start off with.
Yes.
Would you offer kind of the classic Aviator game from Scribe and that kind of thing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two questions there. The first one is the existing ones that come from the sort of aggregators. Absolutely. We consider those table stakes. You have to have those. And so we have those. We support them. They're just as good on BetHog as they are everywhere else. But what we do have front of house are our original games that are developed by us that are unique to us. A lot of those are really clearly inspired by the Crash type games. So those are like sort of Aviator or Crash, Mines, Dice. We have those titles. But what we've done with some of them is we've then started to push them further and say, okay, what's the next evolution of this game? So Aviator is a great example of that. So Aviator is actually quite a social game in that you can see where other people are, but you don't really have any other interaction with them. You're not competing with them. You're all just playing sort of independently. If you were into child psychology, you would call it parallel play. both of you are playing together beside each other, but you're not playing with each other. So we've created a game called Huddle Tournament, where basically you have any number of people. We've actually one running today. We'll have about 50 people will come in. They will play 10 rounds of Crash or Aviator. They basically all start with $100 in play money, and the one with the most money after 10 rounds wins the jackpot. So it's kind of like competing with other people at playing Crash. And that one actually has been sort of one of our most popular games. Like people come in every day at noon ET to play this game and compete with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that almost reminds me a little bit of a kind of a poker table element as well, in that you maybe have a buy-in and then you've got a certain amount of chips.
So there's a buy-in, you buy in, you get $100 in chips, and then you use those chips to compete with other players to see who has got the most money at the end of it. And actually, surprisingly, it might sound like just a game of pure chance, but there actually is skill, because what happens is there's no, say, for example, if you're ahead, you start to play more conservatively because you want, you're leading, so you don't need to take any risks. If you're way behind, you need to start playing more aggressively. And then the question is, if other people are aggressive, maybe you want to avoid the ones they're playing aggressively on. So there's a lot of skill actually comes in later on in the game.
Yeah, so some really interesting trends that you kind of outlined already, and certainly the USP is kind of there. You've outlined it straight away. In terms of the crypto side of it, because obviously with some of your previous ventures, we can see with hindsight that you identified some trends that did become popular and did become successful, and obviously crypto is not new. Crypto gaming is not new, but it's still not exactly a huge portion of the market.
Correct.
Do you see it becoming? Is this something you're really betting big on?
Yeah, absolutely. So crypto is pretty core to what we do. I think we are still very early with crypto, even though crypto is now. I think Bitcoin just passed silver in market cap. It would have to grow another 10x to pass gold, and I absolutely think it will. I think Bitcoin is this generation's gold, and so we could easily see a 10x. Other assets like Solana, which we build on, is $100 billion asset. So it's still very small, but there's so much economic value being built on there. There's so many different products. From an operator point of view, one of the simplest things to tackle or address with crypto is just payments. And anyone who's ran an operator like FanDuel or even internationally will talk about, actually one of the biggest problems is not getting customers. It's actually getting the money in. Like, I have a customer, they want to play, they have money. How do they get money from a bank account in Indonesia or New Zealand into this account and back out again? And the current payment rails are just make it incredibly difficult. It's very expensive. You live in fear that you're going to lose it. Crypto just makes it simple. I just give somebody a wallet address. They send the money there. It happens very quickly at almost no cost, with no chargeback or fraud. So, really incredible. That's the first part. The second part I would say is, which I think is interesting and actually lends a little bit with FanDuel, was the crypto audience today doesn't actually have a very innate overlap with casino type products, because crypto really appeals to sort of a young male competitive demographic, right? So this is a demographic that will play poker, DFS, sports betting. These are all products that they think they can win at, right? They think they're EV positive at. Casino games are not that. Like, no one goes into a casino game believing, or no one should, that long term they're a winner, right? EV positive. But those games like DFS, FanDuel was, and poker are. So some of the titles that we are building are ones that are going to be more games of skill. So these are titles where people can play, and if they are skilled, they can actually win on, because we think that actually is a product type that is massively attracted to the young male competitive audience that's in crypto today. So that's kind of like, we think, is another big unlock, which is building products for that crypto community, as opposed to just taking slot games and go, here's a slot game, people play this. We actually build titles for this crypto audience.
Yeah, again, interesting. If we were to look at kind of geographical markets, what are you which ones are you targeting now, but also perhaps in the future? And also, I know it's very early in the journey, but in terms of people you'd want to kind of emulate or challenge or surpass, I mean, in terms of crypto operators, obviously stake.com, comes to mind as kind of an archetypal example.
Yeah, absolutely. So two questions. The first one in geography. So, the area we're not targeting is the US, UK, and then sort of most of Western Europe, where, we're not licensed. And so we block users from those countries. Then outside of that, we tend not to sort of think in terms of geography. We tend to think more in terms of, do they have crypto or not? So where you target matters and where you're putting your marketing dollars. We're putting our marketing dollars towards places where we know people have cryptocurrency. So, for example, I could say, we operate in, say, Canada outside of Ontario, right? We could target that, but if only 5% of those people have crypto, the conversion is going to be terrible. Instead, I could put marketing dollars behind a crypto channel where those people are spread out all over the world, but I know they all have crypto. And so that's where we're sort of focusing. We're not really focusing on particular geographies. We're more focusing on people of crypto. So that's number one. Number two is, in the terms of the existing market, Stake's done an incredible job. They've grown incredibly rapidly. They've, things like crash games is something they've really innovated with, provably fair. Massive credit for what they've done there. They've done an incredible job on VIP as well. So they're a very, very formidable competitor. I would say one of the things I would say though about the crypto casinos is interesting though, is if you go into the sort of crypto communities though, and so for example, on say Twitter, crypto Twitter, almost never do people talk about crypto casinos. There's almost no discussion about them. I never see people talking about Stake. It's as if Stake doesn't use crypto. Stake is probably the most successful consumer crypto product today. And no one on crypto Twitter ever talks about it. And I think part of the reason is the product that Stake is putting out doesn't really connect with that crypto audience, right? Maybe the sportsbook side does. That definitely there is some discussion there, but the casino side doesn't. And so again, where we see the opportunity is to have a product that is part of the crypto community, that is being discussed by the crypto community, that has products that appeal to them. And so that's where we sort of see our opportunity. Now, the other thing I'd say is this is early in a market that is going to be huge. And so I'd see all of these. And if you look at Tanzanite, you see everyone is growing, right? It's not a case of, this is a mature market and the only way to grow is to take share. Actually, what we're seeing is all of the big operators are growing because they're actually growing the market.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Apologies if I've used the word interesting a lot, because genuinely it is kind of fascinating parts of the market, and as you say, potentially future areas of growth. You mentioned Twitter, and I want to jump ahead to a question I'd planned on there, because obviously you're quite active on Twitter, on social media, and obviously you're not the only chief exec to do so. Elon Musk being the example, given that he owns X. But obviously, in the industry, kind of Jason Robbins at DraftKings as well. Just wondering, really, in general, kind of, do you think the modern CEO does need to be active on social media? And do you ever perhaps worry that, I want to post this, but it might have more connotations than it might for someone who perhaps isn't running a business?
Yeah. I don't think, if you're in a consumer business, if you're not a consumer business, I don't think it's as important. If you're in a consumer business, I think it's massively powerful. I don't think you have to. I think you can be very successful in consumer business without it. And I think some people just aren't very good at it. It's just it's something that I think you have to enjoy doing it. I think if you don't enjoy doing it, I don't think forcing yourself to do it is a good idea. And you can tell when somebody's inauthentic, right? Where they have somebody write it for them. They're just very boring. It's, I'd say one of the things, without getting political about it, but in the recent US election, there was a little bit of an election between people whose Twitter was scripted and people who were unscripted, right? And the scripted stuff, like, and you just see the replies on the scripted stuff, like people, it just no one bought into it. They're just like, this is garbage. It's like, why are you foisting this on us? Whereas the unscripted stuff would generate debate, and there would be like discussion, and you could just tell. I don't know if it changed the election result, but it to me it was very interesting. I do think that the massive benefit of being on Twitter is that it actually allows you to talk directly with your audience in a way that is surprisingly difficult when you're CEO of a big company. When you're CEO of a big company, oftentimes the information you get from consumers is sort of filtered through every layer in the organization. So, when people have complaints, when there's sort of changes in the industry, your marketing department might not see it, and then they don't report it, and then you don't know anything about it. I think if you're really active in the community through something like Twitter, you're part of it. You're seeing it, and you're talking to people that have no stake in it. People will just complain to you, and you will get visibility of what the issues are. So I think it is like a massive benefit to being on Twitter, but like you have to be organically on Twitter. You have to be replying to people, and I think you also have to really enjoy it. I think if you don't, it's kind of inauthentic, and people see that.
Yeah, fair points. Another example, Richard Flint, former Skybet CEO, very active on Twitter. I mean, he's said on the Huddle that you do need a thick skin if you're a CEO on Twitter. But really interesting point about the election. Obviously, the successful side made a lot of sort of independent podcast appearances, and not using that as a plug for this interview. But I mean, it's worth pointing out that before we discuss this, I didn't send you any questions. None of this is scripted, so it's not to say you can't have a good interview, knowing the questions in advance. But yeah, just we can, as you say, you can see the kind of organic value of someone just speaking at the moment.
I think again, if we look at the recent election, it was in a lot of ways an election between old media and new media. Old media being, if we look at the US, vast majority of newspapers endorsed Harris. Whereas if you look at new media, and primarily I'm looking there at like podcasts, there was just like the Trump campaign really embraced Trump podcasts, and not just Joe Rogan. Like we're looking at, Theo Vaughn, Aidan Ross. He identified a constituency and, went after it and engaged with that constituency. And that was when you actually look at the youth vote, like of the people that vote, there was a 30-point swing. I think it was a young man under the age of 30. It was a 30-point swing, which is unheard of in the last 4 years. Was that podcast? I think his campaign identified that he was resonating with it, but him going on those podcasts almost certainly had an impact. So I do think that this is like a new form of media that is like, podcasting is not new. It's been around, but it's consistently been growing. And I think when something grows 30% year on year over 20 years, it's not a rocket ship, but it's like it starts to become very, very important. And we're hitting the point now where it's become very important, where I think any future election campaign, or really anybody in a consumer business, they have to look at podcasts, they have to look at streaming as one of their primary channels where they have to be engaging their audience.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a fair bit about kind of trends for the future, things are potentially going to grow. In terms of kind of history and the past, we mentioned FanDuel and actually Flutter.com as well. Obviously a lot of people will be familiar with kind of your story in founding FanDuel, but at the same time that there might be a lot of people, perhaps even in the US market right now, who associate with the current names. Amy Howe's the CEO, and in terms of, I wanted to maybe for our viewers, in terms of your story, if you could kind of, a brief overview of kind of the history of how FanDuel and Flutter started and what your role was there.
Yeah, so going way back to 2000, I joined Flutter as it was then. It was called Flutter.com as a product manager. It was three Americans that founded it. The idea was it was kind of an eBay of betting. So you would have all these like, millions and millions of like individual bets, and other people could come in and take the other side of those bets. And you could bet on anything. We tried that idea in 2000, and it didn't really work. And it didn't really work for lots of reasons why the idea I don't think probably will ever work. But what did work was the sort of exchange side, and Betfair really demonstrated that worked. And so Flutter.com launched a competitor, like a more direct competitor to Betfair. And by the end of 2001, we merged with Betfair, and I stayed at the company for a little while afterwards, but then moved on. That company became Betfair, then became Paddy Bar Betfair, and then latterly it changed its name to Flutter Entertainment. But that's where it got its brand from. I in 2007 with four co-founders started a product called Huddle, which was a prediction market. So very similar to Polymarket. If you've been tracking that one, we launched in 2007. 2008 was an election year, so it was incredible. All our metrics were up. And then whenever the election happened, our metrics started going down again, which is exactly the same what's happening with Polymarket. It seems that like prediction markets are really good for elections. They're not great. They're not as nearly as interesting outside of elections. And that's, I think, what Polymarket will see now. So in 2009, we sort of like we'd raised money. HubDub wasn't working because we were out of an election year, and so we started looking around what we could do instead. And we hit on fantasy sports was a product that was we thought was really interesting. People loved it, but it was very slow. The games took like all season. You would start in September and you would have to play through. You couldn't join in the middle of the season. You had to join an existing league, or you had to form an existing league. And the prizes were kind of minuscule, right? So we were like, oh, and lastly, you couldn't really play on your mobile phone because they were all sort of clanky, and the technology was really bad. And so we were like, well, what if we built one that was faster? The games would only last one day. They would have real prizes, and you could play on your phone. And that was the idea behind FanDuel. We launched it in the summer of 2009. Quite quickly, it became obvious that we had a hit on our hands. And the company grew very rapidly from 2009, sort of standing start. We were growing like sort of 5x year on year. So by 2015, we were doing about 140 million in revenue. So the company was an absolute rocket ship. And so in terms of employees, I think we scaled from like 5 co-founders to 500, 600 employees over that period. So that was a kind of like the journey. We ran into a lot of legal and regulatory issues in sort of 2015, 2016. We also went through an abortive merger with DraftKings, which would have been a very different history. That got blocked. And then sort of 2017, 2018, a couple of things happened. One, I and the rest of my co-founders left. But the other thing was that FanDuel was merged with Flutter's international division, or US division. So that's sort of like the sort of the FanDuel today, and that became known as FanDuel. So the FanDuel today is basically this company. We started in 2009, or started the company in 2007, launched in 2009, and then when sports betting happened, sorry, the third thing, sports betting became legalized, and then when sports betting became legalized, basically what happened is FanDuel cross-sold all those users that we had brought in for DFS into sports betting and casino in those markets we could do it. And so that was really the platform that sort of made FanDuel be successful.
Yeah, and as we can see today, it leads in the US market and leads kind of Flutter's revenue as well. Of late, there have been some kind of legal proceedings involving you and these. I don't know if you could maybe just, obviously not going into too much legal detail, this is not a courtroom, but if you could give us kind of the latest overall update from your side.
Yeah, I give you kind of a sort of broad sort of outline of the case, and all the filings are public. So that nothing I'm saying here is not something that you couldn't read through in the filings, but they are very dense. So essentially what happened in 2018 was FanDuel was merged with Flutter's international or a US division. And in exchange, everyone got shares in this new company, which is called FanDuel Group. So the old FanDuel shareholders got 40% of FanDuel Group. Now, the way FanDuel was structured was that the first 559 million of any exit would go to our preference shareholders. Those were like KKR, Shamrock. They were investors who'd invested in the business. Any money after that first 559 million was shared with ordinary shareholders, that was founders and employees and early investors in the company. Now, when you do a transaction like this, almost always what you will do is you will value the shares you're getting in that new entity. Because it's what you would call a paper for paper transaction, we have to decide, well, what's this 40% of FanDuel Group worth? Well, at this point in 2018, our board was controlled by these late stage investors like KKR and Shamrock. And what they realized was if they put an artificial low valuation on this, they get all of the business. They get all of that 40%. If they actually valued it and got, say, an independent, like an investment bank or some independent party to value it, they wouldn't get all of it. They'd have to share it with the common shareholders. And so that's exactly what they did. What they did was they didn't value it. They basically arbitrarily said it was worth 559 million. And 2 years later, they then sold that 40% to Flutter for 4.2 billion. So they were like, oh, this is only worth 559 million, even though this happened after PASPA was repealed. So, when PASPA was repealed, valuation. So Flutter's share price shot up, I think it was like 15% or 20%, which is incredible because they only had a small stake in the US. The Score's share price, I think, went up 3x or 4x. DraftKings closed money at a $1.5 billion valuation. So all the valuations were shooting up. FanDuel's board, who had a vested interest in saying it was worth 559 million, they could cut them out. Now, what happened after that was that basically myself, my co-founders, over 100 former employees, and a number of the early investors, or all of the early investors who were harmed by this, we filed suit. And we filed suit in New York in February of 2020. The defendants, which is not the defendants of which principally it is the former FanDuel board, put in a defense that they did not owe a fiduciary duty to shareholders. So they basically claimed that they did not owe a fiduciary duty to shareholders. Like as normally as a board member, you represent the interests of the company and the shareholders. You can't self-deal is one of the things. You can't sort of steal company assets. They claimed that under Scottish law, where FanDuel Limited was incorporated, that they didn't owe a fiduciary duty to us. That actually one part of the case went all the way to the New York Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York, and we, the plaintiffs, won. The Court of Appeals said, no, you do owe a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, and therefore the case is proceeding. And that's where we are today. So we filed an extended complaint over the summer, which actually has got evidence. And we're now in front of the Supreme Court in New York that is taking this case onward. So that's kind of where we are. The New York court system is very slow, which is problematic, but that just takes time. So that's where we are today. We filed it originally in February. We went through this sort of long process to definitively define that they did owe us a fiduciary duty. And that's where we are today, and we're continuing with the case.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate the summary, Nigel. Thanks for talking me through that, because as you say, you can find these in the filings, but yes, those filings normally in any case are quite dense. Yeah, I've got a couple of areas to kind of finish off with. I'm going to keep with the theme of looking back and looking ahead, and nothing to do with the legal case. I know we just talked about it, but moving on to broadly, I'm wary of not necessarily giving you an easy ride, but we've had a very pleasant conversation so far. But want to challenge you a little bit and ask, you've seen a lot of success, but do you harbor any regrets? Anything that you wish you did differently, or things that could have panned out a different way in your career?
I'm not big into that. Like, it's the kind of not my mentality to kind of go, I really wish I'd done this or that. The My own psychology is more to like look for opportunities. Like, when people say to me like, I wish I'd bought Bitcoin in like 2009. Right? It's sort of classic one, right?
Yeah.
Regret. Why didn't I just buy Bitcoin and eat cheese puffs and sit in front of the TV? Instead, and that one is like a stupid one because it's like, sure, I wish I'd won the lottery. To me, I'm much more interested in like, what are the things today that in 10 years time, I might be like, why didn't I do that? Right. I think there are certain things it's sometimes worth back testing and go, well, what might have been, 5 years ago, like, something I didn't do 5 years ago when I left FanDuel in 2018 was I decided to stay out of the US gaming market, consciously decided. And the reason was that I felt that FanDuel and DraftKings would win. I felt it was a real mistake to try and be a late entrant into that market. And I think that's proven totally right. I have actually got involved in, so I'm actually on the board of a company in Brazil and another one in Mexico. I've been involved in a couple of startups in India because these are gaming startups, because I thought those markets were early. I definitely spend a lot of time thinking about what are the places where we're early, right? I think a mistake a lot of people too often make is they wait till they see a success and then they want to be in that market. Like in FanDuel, we launched FanDuel and we weren't the first, but we were the first successful one. And then we saw like 100 derivative competitors that, had no real innovation or no way of winning. And they all failed, like, or almost all failed. I think it's much more interesting of looking at markets and going, and crypto, I think, is absolutely one where, what is a market where I think in 10 years time could be 100 times bigger than today. And I think crypto is one. I look at markets where I think today they're doing something interesting and they're largely misunderstood, right? Crypto is a classic one. Like, it's just like there's still people who think it's like full of criminality and it's full of fraud and scams and that, big companies wouldn't touch it, right? Like, that's true today. Like, big companies, have, major gaming operators outside of the crypto ones generally don't take crypto. That's an interesting space. Whereas a space, and then there's other spaces like AI, which I think is really interesting. But AI is on a super hot streak at the moment. And so it's hard to look at it and go, okay, I would be early here. Like, everyone is sort of piling into AI. And so that gives me pause on AI, which is like, well, what is the elements of AI that I think are sort of, misunderstood, that aren't overheated, that I think could be really interesting in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. That's sort of something. And then I also look at what are the things today that people don't really take seriously, that, a lot of innovations in technology, like they start out like toys. And an example of that, which is a niche of crypto, is like meme coins. Meme coins are stupid, right? They don't really, I think any economist will look at them and then tell you that they are ridiculous. Warren Buffett hates Bitcoin, thinks it's the stupidest thing ever. It doesn't pay any dividends. It's a non-productive asset. It's a pet rock. And so to me, that's a really interesting space to look at and go, okay, they're not. I don't think people are fully understanding the potential of anything that they don't sort of take seriously. Like, some things you're right not to take seriously. Like they are stupid, and a lot of these things that are like look like toys at the start, a lot of them don't make sense, but there's often some parts of it that like, so for example, even the early internet was like, we like, so video on the internet was kind of dominated by porn, right? Like it was, they were the sort of innovators. um but a video on the internet is, we're using it today, like it's become so phenomenal, like it's, and over the top. That's where I spend most of my time thinking about, and I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about regrets. I don't ever. So maybe like a bad question. No, I can't say I really do. I spend more of my time thinking about, and then I just think about what are the things I like. I get pleasure out of building products. I get pleasure out of working with people that I love working with. And so I never regret spending time building products with people I love working with. And so that's kind of always my sort of life's goal, as it were, it is to keep doing that.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned a few topics that we could probably have a whole interview about separately, the US market and AI and things like this. But a final question, I think your answer is a pretty good segue into it, actually, the way it's worked out. But looking ahead, as you say, not to look back, but let's say, and it's obviously never as binary as this, but in, let's say, 5 years or so, what would you be happy with in terms of progress or success for BetHog and separately for yourself as well?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've sort of discovered is that when you're working these sort of new technologies, the things that resonate always surprise you. So we have a thesis with BetHog that there's a whole new channel which is streaming and video. And that's one thesis. We have another thesis that offline gaming is a really social experience. Online gaming often isn't. And we have a thesis that both of those things we can help fix, right? Like we can actually build products that are more social. We can build products that fit better with streaming. But we could be, it's very likely that we could be successful and wrong. And so, it's something that we always kind of leave ourselves open to. We building a, we don't have a roadmap. In fact, I hate kind of, sometimes early on when we started FanDuel, we used to have people that force us to make like 5-year plans. Laughably useless. Like just like, I've never, even like a 3-year plan or a 2-year plan was, maybe you had you had a spend. Once you're starting to scale, you have a spend plan, but at the early stage, complete waste of time. And so, but one of the things we do think a lot about is like, how do we have like a culture of like innovation where we're, trying new things, where we'll build new products and be open to being surprised. Like the product, we launched a product last week, 2 weeks ago, called Hogger. Hogger is a game, it's a crash game where you're basically trying to cross a road. But the twist that we have on it is that other people can bet on you being successful. And so you're the hog, and then the other people are betting you're the little piglets. It's somewhat inspired by when you play blackjack in like Asian casinos. Some Asian casinos, they let the people behind you bet on you, which is a kind of a very bizarre and fun experience. And when I would say the idea behind that game didn't, was maybe August that we came up with that idea. So like we just, our roadmap isn't any more than like 3 months long. Like we will build the next 3 months, and then we will see how our products are doing, and we'll see what new ideas are coming up, and then we'll like decide our next product. So back to your question, what does success look like? I think success to me on the current roadmap, right, is success would be where, one, we have built products that are very compelling and very popular for streamers. I think that'd be the first one. I think that would be a real success. And the second one is we've made gaming more social, right? Like where people are sort of hanging out around these games, that they're less sort of these solitary experiences around casino. I think with sports betting, where we're not focused on right as much at the moment, again, I think we want to make that into a more social experience. The moment my criticism of sports books is I feel that they're inspired by banking apps. They're like, how do we minimize the time from, hitting this landing page to getting my transaction through and out? And that's not how, that's not my experience of betting on a race course. It's not my experience of betting in a bookies. It's a really social experience. And so I think that these apps are missing an opportunity to actually make that experience more social, more fun. People are living their lives much more online. And so I think if we fully want to make betting as fun experience online as offline, I think we have to really embrace social. So that again would be a big thing that in 5 years' time, if we've delivered social across different betting verticals, that would be, yeah, in 5 years' time, if we've done that, I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, I know I was the one to use the arbitrary kind of 5-year timeline, but I actually do really agree with you in the sense that 5-year plans. We even actually have an inside joke with some colleagues, people that I know, that a 5-year plan, it's you got to live in the today, you got to operate in the tomorrow, that kind of thing. Also, really interesting about your answer is that you didn't just say X amount of revenue within this part. It's that you're kind of looking to kind of change trends within the industry. So yeah, plenty of things to look out for.
Revenue goals, I think, are a terrible idea. The revenue comes from success of these sort of product goals, and it just like. It would be so crazy to put up an arbitrary number. Then that if I was ahead of that arbitrary number, I'd be happy, and below it, I'd be unhappy. I think if we deliver on the product goals, it will deliver revenue goals that we'll be super happy with. And so I'm not so concerned about that. What I really care about is that if we I really care about is delivering products that really resonate with customers. And that was one of the most fun things about FanDuel was like, just meeting people. Like you'd meet somebody on an airplane and they'd be like, wow, you start FanDuel. I had so much fun in FanDuel. Like, it was just like, that was a really cool moment, right? That was like the best, where people are like, oh, I spent, years playing FanDuel. I did this, like, that to me is cool. I don't like that. It's a financial success is great, but that's a downstream effect of the sort of the cultural and product resonance that we had.
Yeah, well, Nigel, thanks very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And from what you're saying, it sounds like hopefully we can catch up again soon and check in on some updates in the next few months and years. But to our viewers, thanks for watching. And Nigel, thanks again. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks very much.